Hello, welcome again to FAIRtax Power Radio. I'm Bob Paxton.
I'm Bob Scarborough.
And in the middle,
it's Steve Hayes.
We are the
FAIRtax
FAIRtax Guys. And folks, do not adjust your set. You are not seeing a repeat of last week's program when we had Steve on with us. And Steve, at the time last week when I was saying we'd like to have you back sometime soon, I wasn't thinking quite this quickly, but again, thanks for making yourself available to us, because we got some really cool stuff to talk about here.
We really do. We're starting to see some things. The momentum is building. After we talked last week about the MAGA attacks and how they went after DeSantis in the same manner that Adam Putnam had done, and it pretty much recalled back on them. But the great news is that Governor DeSantis, by not backing off his support of the fair tax, and in fact just saying, I want to get rid of and abolish the corrupt IRS and get a tax system that works for ordinary folks, he pretty much threw the gauntlet down back at the President Trump. And the interesting thing was, when I went, and this is where the two of you were also, I was able to go to the North Carolina GOP convention, and through some people we met in North Carolina, was able to get meetings with a number of elected officials. And it was quite enlightening, because
go ahead.
North Carolina is on a path to get rid of their corporate income tax, and at this point to reduce their regular income tax down to 2.5%, and on a gradual basis. And basically what we were doing is talking, and these were Republican candidates. To be fair, we had a tentative meeting with the lady who's head of the Democratic Party in North Carolina, but she ended up with a conflict and we couldn't make it work. But I'm going to be talking to her, because this is really a bipartisan issue.
It is.
And to that, before I get into North Carolina, I think everybody should know that yesterday, through the efforts of Chuck Bailey in Alabama, they've got a bill ready to be introduced, which would institute a form of the fair tax at the state level in Alabama. It will eliminate their income tax. It would totally revamp everything. And in the past, when they brought this out, it was always sponsored by a Republican. The meeting we had yesterday was with the minority leader, who is a Democrat, chief of staff, and the former mayor of Mobile, who is now a member of the state legislature. And the idea was, at the end of the meeting, they're going to have a caucus of their members of the state legislature, form a committee who will review the proposed legislation, and probably ask Chuck and I to meet with them. And then it looked like they felt that the caucus would result in an endorsement of introducing the bill.
Excellent.
And one of the reasons primarily that they're looking at this, it's the same thing, and this ties back to my meetings with various North Carolina state officials and a couple of U.S. representatives, by the way, who I'll talk about in a moment, that you've got a situation whenever you do a bill that is going to reduce the income tax. And we've had, in the last year, 18 states reduce their state income tax. Well, in order to replace some of that revenue, they don't have very many options. They either can do more property taxes, which are really not popular, or they can look at doing a sales tax increase. And that's really not popular because just by itself, the sales tax can become rather regressive, meaning penalizing lower income people more than higher income people. So they get a lot of pushback. And what we talked about in both of our meetings, on all of our meetings in North Carolina and with the Alabama group, was that by doing a version of the fair tax with the prebate at the state level, we suddenly allowed ourselves to talk to that demographic of lower income people, and not always just lower, but up to $80,000-$100,000 a year, who are really not in a position where they can wait 2 years for a new plant to be attracted and built, or 3 years, but they need to eat next week. They need to cover their bills.
Yeah.
And this gives an opportunity to do the same thing at the state level that we are now doing at the federal level through the fair tax with the prebate. Because as you recall, at the federal level, a family making $40,000 a year with 2 children pays no fair tax. Whereas under the present system, their spendable income is reduced about $250 a month through payroll taxes, through FICA. Well,
Absolutely.
You can take that same example and you can show that lower income, lower middle class family, look, you're making more, you have more money to spend in your pocket by doing this. And I said, you're suddenly going to enlist a whole new demographic of people that will see a real benefit from supporting this, not philosophically, not long-term, oh yeah, the state's going to grow and more jobs and more prosperity, but next week at the grocery store, next week at the clothing store. Because again, the fair tax version in Alabama, in Nebraska, and in Georgia, where it's being proposed, does the same as the federal. It only taxes new purchases. So when you go buy that used toys at the garage sale, you're not going to pay the state tax on it. When you go buy used clothing, as an example, you're not going to pay tax on it. You're going to be empowering that demographic as to how much tax they pay, but you're going to be putting more money in their pocket every month to use for their family. And that's going to get you a whole group of people to support moving to a no income tax situation that you never had before.
Okay, that sounds really good. I'll tell you, as we mentioned that we were at the Republican convention in the state of North Carolina a couple of weeks ago now, by the time this streams. Most of us were there manning a table, and we talked to a lot of people, but you were kind of behind the scenes talking to a lot of more movers and shakers. And this was arranged by a gentleman that I had, quite frankly, never even heard of before the convention, a guy named Jeff Minch. Introduce Jeff to the audience here and talk about what kind of skills and abilities he brings to the table to help advance the fair tax.
Well, walking around the North Carolina convention, it was something. He knew everybody.
He's from North Carolina.
From North Carolina. Jeff actually was a banker for Wells Fargo for a time, and he got lured into a special election when Dan Bishop, who you may recall was one of the leaders of the attack on the debt ceiling bill, and he's one of the Freedom Caucus, and told me that he was one of the people responsible for making sure we got a vote on the fair tax. And in fact, we were scheduled to meet at the convention, and some things got in the way. And as they do when you're negotiating with Speaker McCarthy to come to a resolution to allow the House to get back in session. And so we weren't able to meet, but I saw him at the dinner that Jeff and I attended for Trump, and Dan said, Steve, we got to meet, we got to talk, I got to see how maybe I can help you more, which was really good. And so we're trying to set that up. But Jeff got into the special election for Dan. That's how he got involved. He has now become a full-time fundraiser for candidates in the state of North Carolina. And he wasn't really with me for that purpose. He was there because he's become a big fan of the FAIRtax and would like to see it move forward. And he suggested we'll get to meet a lot of people, particularly at the state level, if you come to North Carolina. And of course, we went to North Carolina, the three of us, along with others. We had sponsored a table there and had some very good meetings with elected officials and people who are going to be running for office. And the message that we conveyed about the benefits to North Carolina, I think, resonated with all of these people. In fact, all the meetings resulted in variations of, get me more information. I want to know what the downside is. I want to know what I know what the plus points are. Give me whatever you think I'd be attacked on. And then I'd like to have a meeting with others in my staff and go over it. And then I'd like to look at how, if we were going to do this, would be the best way to roll it out. So very positive. Jeff has asked me, until they become publicly out in front on this, not to bring it up, because we were kind of talking, what's said in North Carolina hotel room stays in the room. And that basically is why I'm not naming any names and all. But let's just say that uniformly, we had some good conversations. There are some more to come. I've already been contacted by a couple of staffs who want to continue the conversation. And I can only tell you that it's very positive, because while North Carolina is making strong progress toward becoming like Tennessee, where they get rid of it. When I did an interview for the Carolina Journal, they were talking about, oh, don't you think it's going to be great when we get our income tax rate to 2.5%? And I said, well, that's really good, but 0 is better. And that's something you can do. And also, all the people, and I met with some Democrats too, talked about the fact that it was on this particular glide path. And I said, particularly to the Republicans, you're only an election away from stopping that. You lose your supermajority in the House or the Senate, and you get a Democrat governor, you may not get there. There may be some real problems, or, you don't expect it. But if you don't control both houses, you may have some real friction at going there. So why not just get it done in one fell swoop, where you eliminate it, but eliminate it in a way that's not only pro-growth, but pro the citizens of your state, particularly the ones who are, let's just say, having the most difficult time keeping up with inflation and raising their family. And that was a message that resonated very well there. You would say you'd have to be pretty much dumb not to have that appeal to you as a politician, because these are demographics that no one is, particularly on the Republican side, has really been able to communicate with. That we're talking about a way to do it.
There's been a sustained cycle of uncertainty, exacerbated by the higher prices at the gas pump, the grocery stores especially, working 2 jobs. We know that the FAIRtax handles a lot of the challenges or roadblocks that people are experiencing. Do you think that people are starting to look at this on both sides of the political spectrum as something that might solve a lot of those problems? Is that why folks are turning to HR 25, or why they're so open to any kind of discussion? I heard you say just a minute ago, Steve, that the associates within the offices of the representatives that you met with are now contacting you So that means it went beyond the vest pocket to the desk at the front of their office. And somebody is now saying, hey, we need to get more information. Do you think that it has to do with the fact that we have lived in this particular cycle of inflation for as long as we have, that people are now, the elected officials and others are now coming around?
I think it's got a lot to do with that because nobody has an answer, Bob. You know, they're looking at running in a election next year, and boy, the electorate, you know, it's like the people are not happy, and those are the kind of elections where you get all sorts of unexpected outcomes. Because if people aren't happy, sometimes they stay home, and sometimes they go vote. And you just don't know. It becomes very hard to predict, whereas you may be in, and I learned this terminology from talking to some of these people, a Republican +2 district. and you've got a situation where that assumes that you're going to have the Republicans turn out.
Right, as a scale of 1 or 2 or
right.
So, well, I heard you say earlier too, Ron DeSantis laid the gauntlet down and basically has, without saying fair tax, has said a tax on consumption. Do you think that that's going to sort of pull the other candidates that are competing? If you have a perfect storm of state legislators and the representatives in Washington are now kind of bubbling around with this warming up to an idea of ending the Internal Revenue Service as the tip of the spear, with the fair tax backing it up with a solid plan of action to continue to raise revenues for the Treasury. Do you think that the other candidates for president are going to roll in and have to, based on what DeSantis said, have to say it too?
I think you're going to be in an interesting quandary because some of the candidates are really not far from being establishment candidates, even though they're in a very, minor. Chris Christie and some of the others are much more in line with the present system than others. But you've got a situation, and this is something that we've looked at, and I'll share it with you on this interview because I think it's important to share it with my friends. We're looking very strongly at forming a coalition of groups who will sign on to the premise that what we must do is eliminate the corrupt IRS and replace the existing system with one that works for everybody else.
Yeah, we've been trying on this program to show people how rotten the IRS is and all the bad things that they do, and then justify, hey, we need to get rid of these guys. In fact, next week we're going to go into something else like that. But first, if you get enough people convinced that we've got to change the current system, that's step one. Step two is, all right, here's how we do it.
Well, and I think that's true. I think we've got the best way of going about it. But if to Bob Scarborough's point, if you have these candidates, and let's say you're interviewing one of them, and you ask him, do you agree with Governor DeSantis that we need to abolish the corrupt IRS and get a new system? What's he going to say or she going to say? No, I don't agree. I think we ought to keep this corrupt IRS. It's like that question do you still beat your wife?
Right. Me?
And so I think that is the beauty of having this type of a, let's just say, message that can be brought out, because it's really clear. If you support the IRS, then you support the present system. But let's also make it really clear that the IRS is simply the whipping boy for Congress, because they can't do anything without specific authorization from Congress. Congress knows that they lie, steal, and cheat. They know that. but they do it under Congress's looking the other way because Congress has become convinced that it's the only way to keep that $1 trillion of evasion from becoming $2 trillion.
Mm-hmm.
Is by going out, coercing people, intimidating them, and in some cases extorting payments of money they don't owe.
Yep.
That is something that's authorized by Congress, condoned by Congress, and that's why, even though we all look at the IRS as Bob Scarborough says, the tip of the spear, the rest of the spear is Congress.
Yes.
They're the ones that are driving it into our bodies.
All right. Well, our time's kind of slipping away from us. I want to ask you one more real quick question. We're supposed to be getting a vote. We're going to be getting Speaker McCarthy has promised a vote on the fair tax sometime later this year. And assuming that they follows through on his promise and we pick people on record, do we see some attack ads later? My opponent wants to keep the IRS. I mean, can we flip this attack ad strategy around from instead of my opponent wants to put a 23% tax on you, we say ads say my opponent wants to keep the corrupt IRS. Can we do that?
Well, I think the thing to do, and I think this is something that we can easily do, and I think it's going to help us do more fundraising for AFFT, is to have a voter document that goes out and that Scarborough and Axon and Hayes can all have their local candidates, Republican all, and say, you know, have you signed the pledge to get rid of the corrupt IRS? Check mark?
Yes.
No check mark. And just make sure that's out there. And I believe there will be candidates, because I've talked to some candidates who are going to be running for Congress next term, and they love the idea of being able to sign on saying, I want to abolish the corrupt IRS. And then they would have a contrast potentially, but wouldn't it be great if Democrat and Republican both signed on?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's where we are in terms of the political spectrum from left to right. I think we're at a point now because of the inflation and the sustained challenges that people are facing because of that. Grocery store prices, price of everything is up considerably. And I think that's where we are, and that helps erase the line between Republican and Democrat. It makes it purely a consumer issue, an issue for the citizenry, no matter which lever you pull in the voting booth. I think that's where we are.
I totally agree, Bob, and I think that that's beginning to manifest itself and show with the various people who are now going to be looking at this. But I suspect that what all of us who do various, let's just say, PR actions need to keep bringing up is that you're either for abolishing the corrupt IRS or you're not. It isn't really a simple call. It's a yes or no. And
yeah, that's as simple as it gets.
Yep. And if they say, well, I'm for blah, 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 you know, excuse me, but are you for abolishing the corrupt IRS or not? Because obviously over the last 50 years, Congress hadn't been able to fix it, and they're not going to be able to. So you want to abolish it and go to a system that works better for the ordinary people and for the country, or keep what you got? Yes or no?
Yeah, and the answer, of course, is yes, yes, yes.
That's what I would expect. Same people would say.
What's going to come out of their mouth? You just know.
And once it starts to become yes on both sides, then I believe we're going to have real momentum next year, no matter who's elected president. Well, I shouldn't say that. I don't know that President Biden will ever be able to grasp this, taking away power from DC like it would and giving it back to the people, because that's really the opposite of what he and his administration believe. You know, they believe that the government should have all the power of the people, not much. We believe the people should have the power, not the government.
All right, real quick, what is somebody watching the program today who is now inspired to help in the issue, helping get this happening? What can the average Joe Blow do that can help the cause along?
Couple of things. Go to fairtax.org, join us, make a contribution, become a member. Second thing is write a letter or make a phone call. Probably a phone call is even more effective, to your local senator, member of the House, and ask them a simple question. Does Senator Blah support abolishing the corrupt IRS or not? Can you please let me know?
Okay, that's easy enough.
That's very easy. It's a 3-minute phone call. And the only thing you have to do, though, is that they'll probably not call you back. You're probably going to have to call them a number of times to get an answer. And just tell them, I want to let all my social media people know the senator's position for the next election.
Yeah, be persistent, but be polite, but be persistent.
Be polite. Yeah, just say, I've got a lot of people asking me, and I've sort of been nominated for by these people to call. And I'll keep calling until I get an answer.
All right. Well, that sounds like that'll be a good one. And Steve, again, as always, we certainly appreciate your expertise and your insight that you bring to FairTax Power Radio when we have you on. I am very encouraged by the fact that even though you couldn't name names, you're saying there is real progress behind the scenes in advancing the FairTax forward, both at the national and at various different state levels. So hang on, this should be a fun movie to watch here.
It's going to be a lot of fun, a lot more fun than it's been in the last few years, Bob and Bob, because we actually have a lot of momentum and we just need to make it run faster.
And thanks to all the folks that are on, that listen every week or watch. We appreciate that, and stay in touch. And we'll have opportunities for you to help out in your area for sure.
Absolutely. And if you got questions or comments, thefairtaxguys@gmail.com is our email address, and we'll be happy to field as many of those as we can. Some of them that could might even make their way into the show. But as always, we do thank you for listening and watching FairTax Power Radio, sharing the videos. Steve, I'll repeat what I said last week. We hope to have you back sometime soon. I'm not sure it'll be next week again this time. But again, Steve, President of the Americans for Fair Taxation National Grassroots Organization, we always enjoy having you on, and appreciate you sharing your time with us.
I always enjoy it very much. And if you want to make it a regular spot, we'll do that. A certain number of times we'll go for that. Thanks very much. We will do that.
Okay, well, that is going to wrap up this edition of FairTax Power Radio. Thank you so much for watching and listening. Again, I'm Bob Paxton.
I'm Bob Scarborough.
I'm Steve Hayes.
The FairTax Guys reminding you that the fair tax is the only truly fair tax, and once you understand it,
you'll demand it.
So tell me how it works.
It's probably changed since the last time I saw it, but the short answer would be, you want to take this one?
Oh, sure. Okay. Imagine bringing home everything you make. You don't get taxed for saving or accumulating wealth, and your boss doesn't get taxed more even if he pays you more.
Wow, now see, that's amazing.
So the end result of all that is the cost of producing products and running a business goes down, so things cost less. And on top of all that, imagine every criminal, non-citizen, and under-the-table worker also paying taxes.
That's amazing.
That's the fair tax. We